There were 4 of us at that sleepover, but when I counted the sleeping bags in the morning, there were 5. Only 4 had ever been unrolled, and none of us remembered bringing a spare, and none of us remembered who slept in it. I was 11. It was my friend Dana's birthday, the kind of sleepover where your mom drops you off with a rolled-up sleeping bag under one arm and a grocery bag of snacks under the other, and you don't think about anything except staying up past midnight. There were 4 of us invited. Me, Dana, a girl named Priya from our class, and Dana's cousin Meg, who was visiting from out of state and who none of us had met before that night. Dana's parents were downstairs the whole time, which felt important then, like a kind of proof that nothing bad could happen in a house with adults still awake in it. We set up in the basement, which had that finished but not quite feeling basements have, exposed pipe in one corner, carpet that didn't reach the walls. Dana's mom brought down a stack of pizza boxes around 7, and we ate on the floor and watched a movie neither of us can now agree on the name of. That's the first thing that used to bother me, when Dana and I would talk about it years later. We remembered everything else in matching detail, right down to the pattern on Priya's pajama pants, but never the movie. We rolled out our bags in a rough square, feet pointing toward the middle, the way you do so you can talk to everyone at once without turning your head too far. Mine was blue. Dana's was covered in cartoon horses she was already embarrassed by. Priya's was plain green, army surplus, her older brother's. Meg's was the odd one out, a faded plaid, the zipper busted so she had to fold the top of it over instead of closing it. That's 4. I want to be clear about that, because it matters. 4 bags, 4 girls, and I can still see the shape we made on that basement carpet if I close my eyes. I remember it specifically because Dana made us all take a photo before we messed the square up, her mom's disposable camera, flash blinding all 4 of us at once, and that photo existed in a shoebox at her house for years afterward, 4 girls and 4 bags and nothing else in the frame worth mentioning. Before the movie, while Dana's mom was still upstairs finishing dinner, Meg told us a little about herself, since none of us had known her before that night. She said her family moved around a lot for her dad's work, that she'd been to 6 schools already and she was 12. She said this in a flat way, not sad exactly, just tired, like a fact she'd repeated enough times that it had worn smooth. Priya asked if that was hard, and Meg said you got used to sleeping in strange rooms, that after a while all bedrooms started to feel the same in the dark. I didn't think about that comment again until years later. Somewhere around 11, Dana's mom came down to tell us to keep it quiet, and after she left we did the thing every sleepover does, which is turn off all the lights except one, and start telling the stories you save for exactly this. Priya told one about a hook on a car door. Meg told one about a house down her street that people said had a room that didn't exist from the inside. I don't remember what I told. I remember it didn't scare anyone, and I remember being a little stung by that, the way you are at 11. At some point after midnight, we settled down to actually sleep. I remember the specific quality of that basement dark, no streetlight coming in because there were no windows at ground level, just the thin orange glow of a nightlight Dana's mom had left at the bottom of the stairs. I remember hearing the other 3 breathing change, one by one, into something slower. I remember being the last one awake, the way I often was, listening to the house settle. Sometime in the middle of the night, I half woke to a sound I couldn't place, a soft dragging noise, like fabric pulled across carpet, and in the fog of being half asleep I decided it was one of the girls shifting in her bag and let myself sink back under without opening my eyes to check. I've wondered since if that was the sound of the 5th bag being set down. I woke up before the others. That happens to me still, first light and I'm up whether I want to be or not. I sat up in my bag and looked around the basement in that gray pre-morning color, doing the thing you do when you wake up somewhere unfamiliar, just cataloging the room. Pizza boxes stacked by the stairs. Dana's cartoon horses. Priya curled tight in her army bag. Meg's plaid one with the busted zipper. And a fifth one. It was pushed slightly outside our square, closer to the corner with the exposed pipe, angled away from the rest of us like whoever was in it wanted to face the wall instead of the room. Dark green, canvas heavy, the kind of bag you'd take camping, not the kind an 11-year-old girl owns. It was zipped all the way to the top. I could see the shape of someone in it, the long lump of a body, rising and falling very slightly, so slightly I told myself for a long time I imagined that part. I didn't wake anyone up right away. I want to explain why, because it's the part people always ask about, and the answer is that for maybe a full minute I thought it made sense. I thought someone's older sibling came down. I thought maybe Dana's mom fell asleep in one of our bags out of pure boredom babysitting us and dragged a spare down from a closet. My 11-year-old brain built 4 or 5 small, boring explanations in a row, one after another, and I lay back down inside one of them and almost fell back asleep. It was Priya who woke up next and saw it and made a sound that wasn't quite a scream, more like the air going out of her, and that's what got the rest of us up. We stood in a clump near the stairs. None of us wanted to get closer to it than we already were. Dana kept saying it must be her cousin's, some second bag Meg's family packed by mistake, and Meg kept saying no, hers was the plaid one, hers was right there. She was pointing at her own bag while she said it like she needed to confirm it was still where she'd left it. The green bag didn't move again while we watched it. That's the part one keep coming back to, that it had been moving, that small rise and fall, and then it wasn't, like it had noticed us noticing. Dana's mom came down when she heard us on the stairs, already annoyed, probably expecting a fight over the last of the pizza. She stopped in the doorway when she saw it. I remember her face doing something I'd never seen an adult's face do in front of me before, a kind of fast blankness, like she'd shut a door behind her eyes. She told us to go upstairs. All of us, right now, don't argue. We didn't see her open it. We were on the stairs, 4 of us in a knot, listening, and there wasn't much to hear, just the basement door closing behind her, and then a stretch of quiet that felt much too long for a woman checking a sleeping bag. When she came back up, she was carrying it rolled and bagged in one of those black garbage bags people use for yard waste, tied at the top. She told us it must have gotten mixed in with the bags from a garage sale they'd had that summer, some leftover donation nobody had cleared out. She was already walking toward the garage while she said it, not really toward us. She put it in the trunk of her car, not the garbage cans by the curb, and she drove somewhere before breakfast and came back without it, and nobody in that house ever brought it up again in front of us kids. Meg went home 2 days later, back to whatever state her family had come from, and Dana told me a few weeks after that they'd lost touch almost immediately, no calls, no letters, which struck both of us as strange even then, since cousins usually keep at least a thread of contact going. I asked Dana once, in high school, if she'd ever tried to track Meg down through her aunt, the one married to Meg's father. Dana said she had, and that her aunt had gotten a strange look and said Meg's father's job had taken them somewhere overseas, somewhere Dana's mother didn't want details about, and the subject had closed itself the way subjects do in families that don't like sitting with hard questions. Dana and I talked about it exactly twice as adults. Once in high school, half laughing, the way you do with old fears you've decided to outgrow. And once about 6 years ago, not laughing at all, when she told me her mother, near the end of her life, in the fog of a bad month, kept apologizing to someone in the room who wasn't there, saying she was sorry she only had 4 names on the list, sorry there'd only been room set for 4. I never told her what I noticed and never said out loud at 11, standing on those stairs, that the 5th bag hadn't been dropped there messily, the way a mistaken garage sale donation gets shoved in a corner. It had been unrolled with care. Zipper lined. Corners squared to the wall. Placed like someone had chosen its spot in our circle before any of us went to sleep, and then decided, at the last moment, to turn its face away from ours. My best friend spent the night at my house 11 times the year we were 13, and I have since found out that 7 of those times she was already asleep in her own bed, 2 miles away, the whole night through. Her name was Corinne. We'd been friends since 2nd grade, the kind of friendship where you have a shorthand for everything, where your mothers know each other's coffee order. That year, 7th grade, was the year we started having sleepovers, just the 2 of us, no group, because we decided the group had gotten boring and we hadn't yet. The first few were completely normal. I want to say that clearly, because what came after makes it easy to look back and find omens and things that were just Tuesday nights. We'd watch something on my laptop with the sound low, eat the cereal my mom bought specifically for when Corinne stayed over because Corinne liked the sugary kind and my mom didn't usually let me have it, and we'd talk until 1 or 2 in the morning about nothing, boys we didn't actually like, teachers we did. The thing I noticed first, and didn't think about for months, was that Corinne stopped needing the bathroom. That sounds like a strange detail to fixate on, but when you spend that many nights with the same person, you learn their patterns, and Corinne's pattern had always been a glass of water before bed and a trip to the bathroom sometime around 11. That year, it stopped. I'd ask if she wanted water and she'd say she was fine. I never saw her drink anything after dinner on the night she slept over, and I never saw her get up. The second thing, which I did notice at the time but explained away, was that she got cold. Not cold like a person gets cold, but cold like the room got colder near her, in a way I associated with sitting close to an open freezer. I used to joke about it, tell her to stop being a front-stealer and pull the blanket back over. She'd laugh and pull it back and the joke would end there. There was a third thing too, smaller, that I only put together later. Corinne used to fall asleep fast, faster than made sense for a 13-year-old wired on sugar cereal and gossip, sometimes mid-sentence, her voice trailing into nothing while I was still waiting for her to finish a thought. The first few times I laughed about it, told her she talked in her sleep, half a joke. After a while I stopped bringing it up, because she never remembered starting the sentence at all, and the blank look she gave me when I quoted it back to her started to feel less like forgetfulness and more like she genuinely hadn't been the one speaking. Around October, my mom made an offhand comment that I didn't understand until much later. She said something like, "Doesn't Corinne's mother worry, letting her out so many nights a week?" I said it wasn't that many nights, maybe twice a month. My mom looked at me strange and said she'd seen at least 5 texts that fall from Corinne's mom checking that Corinne had actually made it here, like she'd lost track of her own daughter's schedule. I remember thinking that was just Corinne's mom being scattered, because Corinne's mom worked a lot and always seemed a little behind on things. In November there was a night I try not to think about too often, though it comes back to me anyway. Corinne had gone very quiet after dinner, quieter than usual, and when I asked if she was okay she said her chest felt tight, like she couldn't get a full breath. I asked if she wanted me to get my mom. She said no, sharply, more sharply than the moment called for, and then softer, said it always passed if she just sat still a minute. I sat with her while she stared at the wall, not blinking much, until whatever it was passed and she came back to herself and asked what we'd been talking about, like she'd genuinely lost the thread of an entire conversation. The sleepovers kept happening through the winter. I want to walk through one specific night in December because it's the one I go back to most. Corinne showed up around 6, we ordered a pizza, we watched 2 episodes of something, normal in every way. Around 10:30 my mom knocked and said goodnight through the door the way she always did. Around midnight, Corinne and I were lying in the dark, not talking anymore, and I said something to her, I don't remember what, some last comment before sleep, and she didn't answer. I turned over to check if she'd fallen asleep that fast, which wasn't like her, she was always the one who stayed up later than me. She was lying on her back with her eyes open, looking straight at the ceiling, and she didn't blink.
I watched for what felt like a long time, probably wasn't more than 30 seconds, and she did not blink once. I said her name.
She turned her head toward me, slow, like she was surfacing from somewhere, and said, "Sorry." I zoned out, and blinked twice fast, almost catching up on all the blinks she'd missed, and went back to normal. I told myself I'd imagined the length of it. In January, Corinne stopped coming over as often, and when she did, my mom started acting strange around her, overly polite in a way that wasn't like my mom, who'd known Corinne for 5 years and usually just yelled up the stairs that dinner was ready. I asked my mom once, after Corinne went home, if something was wrong. My mom said she didn't want to scare me, and then told me anyway, the way parents do when the thing scaring them is bigger than their good judgment. She said she'd run into Corinne's mother at the grocery store in November and asked how Corinne was doing since the two of them, meaning me and Corinne, had been spending so much time together. Corinne's mother had gone very quiet and then said Corinne didn't really leave the house much these days. That she'd been having a hard year. That she barely came out of her room. My mom had laughed it off in the moment, assumed some mix-up, some misunderstanding about which nights were which. But she said it sat wrong with her for weeks after, and she started, without telling me, keeping a closer eye on the nights Corinne stayed over. She told me she started doing something specific, something I didn't know about at the time. She started checking on us after midnight, cracking the door, just looking in. She said most nights it looked exactly like you'd expect. 2 girls asleep.
But there were nights, she said, maybe 3 or 4 that whole year, where she opened the door and I was asleep alone, one shape in the bed, blankets pulled up on both sides like there'd been 2 people in it very recently, and Corinne nowhere in the room. No sound of the bathroom.
No sound of the stairs. She said the first time it happened she searched the whole house, quietly, so as not to wake me, and found nothing, no shoes missing by the door, no window open, and then she went back upstairs and Corinne was there again, in the bed, asleep, like she'd never left. My mom never told me this until years later, after Corinne and I had drifted the way you do after middle school, after Corinne had moved with her family before high school even started and we'd lost touch the ordinary way, texts getting shorter and then stopping. I asked my mom once, as an adult, half joking, if she thought Corinne had been some kind of ghost sneaking off to haunt other parts of the house.
She didn't laugh.
She said she didn't think that, and then she said something that has stuck with me since, that she used to lie awake on those nights turning it a different way, wondering not where Corinne went, but who, or what, was in the bed on the nights she was gone.
Because whatever it was, she said, breathed.
She'd stood in that doorway more than once, listening to it, and it breathed exactly like a sleeping 13-year-old girl, in and out, slow and even, for as long as she stood there. Around February, before things trailed off entirely, there was one more night worth mentioning.
I woke up around 4 in the morning, thirsty, and started to get up for water, and Corinne, without opening her eyes, said, "Don't stay there," in a voice that didn't sound fully like hers, flatter, a half tone off. I froze halfway out of the bed.
She rolled over then, eyes still closed, and said nothing else, and in the morning she had no memory of saying anything at all, laughed it off as me dreaming her voice into the dark. I didn't get up for water again that night, or on any night after that one when she stayed over. I never asked Corinne about any of it. We were kids, and then we weren't friends anymore, and then too much time had passed to ask a question like that without it sounding insane. I looked her up a few years ago. She's fine, as far as I can tell from the outside of a life on the internet. Married, a job, a dog. I don't have her number anymore. Sometimes I think about that December night, her not blinking, and the 30 seconds I decided to round down to nothing. And I think about my mother in that doorway, counting breaths that matched the sleeping girl's breathing so exactly that she never once had the nerve to walk closer and look at the face attached to them. At 2 a.m, our landline rang, and when I picked it up, the voice on the other end was mine, asking to speak to me. I was 15, and my parents were out of town for a wedding, which meant I got the house to myself for the first time in my life. And I'd invited my friend Blake to stay over because neither of us had ever had a whole house with no adults in it before. We were the kind of friends who didn't need a reason for a sleepover, just an empty house and a Friday. We spent the evening the way you'd expect, ordering food with my mom's card after texting her to ask first, watching movies too loud on the good TV downstairs that we weren't normally allowed to touch. Generally testing the edges of a house with nobody in it to say no. Around 10, Blake's older sister called to check that we were fine, and Blake told her we were, and hung up, and that was the last call either of us expected that night. Around midnight we moved up to my room, spread sleeping bags on the floor even though there was a perfectly good guest bed, because the floor was somehow always better for these things. We talked for a long time about nothing important. At some point I told Blake I thought I'd heard something downstairs, a settling sound, and Blake said old houses do that, and we let it go, the way you let things go at 15 when you want to seem braver than you are. Before any of the knocking started, there was a smaller thing I almost forgot about until much later. Around 11:30, the porch light outside my window flicked off and back on twice, slow, deliberate, not the flicker of a dying bulb but 2 clean pulses like someone testing a switch. I told Blake it was probably a moth or a short in the wiring, the kind of thing you say out loud specifically so it becomes true by being said. We both watched the window for a minute after that, but the light stayed steady, and we let ourselves stop watching. The first knock came around 1. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, on the front door. We both heard it and went dead quiet, the way you do, like silence makes you invisible.
I whispered that it was probably nothing, a neighbor, a package, though nobody delivers anything at 1 a.m.
We didn't go down. After a minute or two with nothing else, we told ourselves it was over. The second time, maybe 40 minutes later, it wasn't the door.
It was 3 knocks on the wall of my room, from the inside, from the wall that backed onto my brother's old bedroom, which had been empty since he left for college that fall.
Blake grabbed my arm so hard it left a mark I noticed the next morning. We sat there a long time not talking, listening for a 4th knock that never came, only ever 3, always 3, like whatever it was had decided that was the correct number and wouldn't be talked into more. I want to explain something about my brother before I go further, because it matters for what happened next. When we were kids, my brother and I had a code, 3 knocks on a shared wall, meaning are you awake, and if you were, you knocked back twice, meaning yes, come find me. We hadn't used it in years. He was away at college 1,100 miles from that house, and I hadn't thought about that code in a long time until I was sitting on my floor at 15 listening to it come through the wall of his empty room. I didn't knock back. I want that on record. Blake asked what it meant, because I must have made some sound or gone some color, and I told her, and she said, very reasonably, that it was probably a pipe, or the house settling the way old houses do, 3 knocks being a coincidence of physics and not a message. We decided, out loud, together, that this was true, mostly because we needed it to be. We tried to distract ourselves after that, put a show on low, and for a while it worked. Around 1:30, Blake's phone buzzed with a text from a number neither of us recognized, no area code we could place, just 3 words, "Are you home?" sent to a number Blake was certain she'd never given out. She showed it to me without saying anything, and I remember neither of us suggested answering it, like some instinct told us that whatever was asking didn't need an answer so much as a reaction, and we weren't going to give it one. It was somewhere close to 2 when the landline rang. We still had one then, mounted in the kitchen, mostly used by my grandmother and telemarketers, and hearing it ring at that hour from 2 floors down was its own kind of wrong.
Blake said don't answer it.
I said, what if it's my parents? What if something happened, and some instinct, the kind you don't examine when you're 15 and scared and trying to be the brave one in front of a friend, got me down the stairs. I picked it up in the dark kitchen, and there was a pause on the other end, a few seconds of open line, breathing or static, I couldn't tell which.
Then a voice, and it took me a full 3 or 4 seconds to understand what I was hearing, because the voice was mine. My own voice, my own specific way of saying it, asked to speak to me, using my own name.
I hung up. I didn't scream, which surprises me now, looking back. I just hung up and stood in the dark kitchen with my hand still on the phone like it might ring again if I let go too fast. Blake came down maybe a full minute later, having worked up the nerve, and found me standing there, and I told her what I'd heard, and she didn't laugh, which told me more than anything she could have said. We called Blake's sister back, and she came to get us within 20 minutes, no questions about whether we were being dramatic, just came and got us and let us stay at her apartment the rest of the night on the couch with the lights on. I remember that detail specifically, that she didn't ask us to explain ourselves before agreeing to come, like something in our voices on the phone made explanation unnecessary. My parents came home 2 days later, and I told my mother a version of it, sanded down, mostly about the knocking, and she went quiet in a specific way that I've come to recognize since is the way adults go quiet when they're deciding how much of the truth to hand a kid. She eventually told me that the landline in that house had a strange history, that before we bought it, years earlier, a teenage girl had lived there and died in a car accident, and that for a while afterward, according to the neighbors who'd been there the longest, her family kept getting calls on that line, late at night, nobody on the other end, until eventually they had the number changed. My mother had known this when we bought the house and decided it wasn't the kind of story you tell a kid before asking them to sleep in it. I never got a satisfying explanation for why my own voice would come out of that phone instead of a stranger's, or a dead girl's, and my mother didn't have one either, or if she did, she didn't offer it. We had the landline disconnected within the month, my father's sighting cost, though I've always suspected it was something else driving that decision, something nobody in my family wanted to say out loud at the dinner table. I looked into the house's history a little more on my own, years later, mostly out of a need to put the story to rest. I found an old local news clipping about the accident, a single paragraph, no photo, the girl's name blacked out by my own hesitation to search it further than I did. I stopped there. Some part of me decided that knowing her name would turn her into someone real enough to keep thinking about, and I wasn't ready for that, not even as an adult sitting safely in a different house on the other side of town. Blake and I are still close. We don't talk about that night often, but a few years ago, over drinks, she told me something I hadn't known, that when she came down to the kitchen and found me holding the phone, before I said a word to her, she'd already heard it too, faintly, through the earpiece still held near my ear from 3 feet away.
Not my voice asking for me. My voice, she said, mid-sentence, saying something else entirely, something she still won't repeat, something that made her grab my arm and pull the phone away from my hand before I could hang it back on the cradle myself.